Oh, I made it. Thanks for waiting. I haven't been running as much as I'd like to be, since California's summer heat has been pretty sweltering. I ran a marathon in Japan last year. Well, I say ran. I ran about 7 miles and then walked most of the rest. And since then, I've kept my runs on the shorter side. To make up for it and motivate myself toward longer distances again, I've reread some books, which inspired me to run in the first place, because they draw connections between distance running and surprisingly liberating states of mind. Now I want to share these books with a video essay, my longest video essay yet by far. Call it an ultra-marathon of a video essay. I'll start out at a mundane pace with McDougall, Jurek, and Murakami, and transition to a Buddhist-themed sprint with Tibetan Lama Sakyong Mipham Rinpoche and the marathon monks of Mount Hiei. Maybe you've read Christopher McDougall's 2009 book Born to Run, a national bestseller. It's credited for getting many folks into distance running because McDougall's combination of science and the exotic gives the sport a romantic flair. McDougall, a runner himself, begins the book with a foot injury. Take any other sport, he says, and an injury like mine would classify me as defective. In running, it makes me normal. The real mutants are the runners who don't get injured. This leads McDougall to the Tarahumara, indigenous natives of Latin America legendary for long-distance running, because for much of their history, running was really the only way to stay alive. The Tarahumara are so mysterious, says McDougall, that they even go by an alias. Their real name is Raramuri, the running people. They were dubbed Tarahumara by conquistadores who didn't understand the tribal tongue. The bastardized name stuck because the Raramuri remained true to form, running away rather than hanging around to argue the point. I suppose it was only a matter of time before someone tried to capitalize on that running away. The Tarahumara became well known in America when wilderness guide Rick Fisher promised corn donations to tempt a team to sponsor sports shoes at a famously difficult ultramarathon. Colorado's Leadville Trail 100 is nearly 4 full marathons, says McDougall, half of them in the dark, with twin 2,600-foot climbs smack in the middle. Leadville's starting line is twice as high as the altitude where planes pressurize their cabins, and from there you only go up. The Tarahumara had some intense competition. For 5 years, says McDougall, Leadville's reigning champion was Steve Peterson, a member of a Colorado higher consciousness cult called Divine Madness, which seeks nirvana through sex parties, extreme trail running, and affordable house cleaning. Let's put higher consciousness to one side for now. Rick Fisher's sponsorship didn't go so hot. No sooner had Team Tarahumara arrived, says McDougall, than they disappeared into the town dump, emerging with strips of tire rubber that they began fashioning into sandals. They'd rather build their own footwear from scraps than wear modern sneakers. Despite that, they won by a landslide. The first non-Tarahumara finisher was nearly a full hour behind Victoriano, a distance of roughly 6 miles. The Tarahumara hadn't just gone from last to first, they'd done serious damage to the record book in the progress. Victoriano was the oldest winner in race history. 18-year-old Felipe Torres was the youngest finisher, and Team Tarahumara was the only squad to ever grab 3 of the top 5 spots, even though its 2 top finishers had a combined age of nearly 100. Along the way, the Tarahumara inspired the American Michael Hickman to join them in Mexico under the name Caballo Blanco, the White Horse. Caballo Blanco gives McDougall access to and insight into the tribes, and plenty of material to write about when he hosts a 50-mile race between the Tarahumara and world-famous ultra-marathoners like Scott Jurek. Before we get into that, McDougall describes the running man theory. One reason humans are so good at running is because, just like the Tarahumara, running is how humans live in the wild. Distance running, says McDougall, was the way we survived and thrived and spread across the planet. You ran to eat and to avoid being eaten. You ran to find a mate and impress her. and with her you ran off to start a new life together. You had to love running, or you wouldn't live to love anything else. We were born to run. We were born because we run. We are all running people, as the Tarahumara have always known. McDougall talks to Dr. Dennis Bramble about a group of South American bushmen who chase a kudu antelope to death. Bushmen? That's really what you call them? Sorry, Jung, I shouldn't have chucked you under the racism bus last episode. Anyway, even if you don't believe humans evolved to track animals to exhaustion, you've got to ask yourself why only one species in the world has the urge to gather by the tens of thousands to run 26 miles in the heat for fun, Dr. Bramble mused. Recreation has its reasons. For a chance to connect with our potential evolutionary history, it's pretty fantastic Caballo Blanco managed to finagle a 50-mile race with American pro-ultra runners on the Tarahumara's isolated home turf. Says McDougall, to check email, Caballo had to run more than 30 miles over a mountain and wade through a river to the tiny town of Urique, where he'd cajoled a school teacher into letting him use the school's creaking PC and its single dial-up line. Once, he missed checking messages because he'd been attacked by wild dogs and had to abort his trip to go in search of rabies shots. This doesn't sound like a very safe sports environment, does it? But once word hit the grapevine that Scott Jurek might be going toe-to-toe with the Tarahumara, other ultra aces suddenly wanted a piece of the action. Among those ultra aces was Barefoot Ted. Barefoot Ted claims the Running Man theory justifies not only avoiding thick-soled shoes, but shoes in general, like Team Tarahumara replacing modern sneakers with dumpster tire sandals. No wonder your feet are so sensitive, Ted mused. They're self-correcting devices. Covering your feet with cushioned shoes is like turning off your smoke alarms. However much legitimate biology research reinforces this idea that human feet are perfectly ideal bone arches, I'm sure the topic of running footwear will always inspire debate. Barefoot Ted wears those toesy slip-ons, Vibram 5 fingers, and Caballo Blanco isn't happy with it at all. You'd better add something to your feet when we cross the canyons, Caballo said. You brought some other shoes, right? Sure, Ted said. I've got my flip-flops. Caballo smiled, waiting for Barefoot Ted to smile back and show he was joking. Barefoot Ted didn't, and wasn't. You don't have shoes, Caballo said? You're going into the barrancas in flip-flops? Don't worry about me. I hiked the San Gabriels in bare feet. These ain't no San Gabriel mountains. The cactus thorns out here are razor blades. You get one in your foot, we're all f***ed. Those trails are dangerous enough without carrying you on our backs. As surprising as Barefoot Ted finishing the 50-mile race at all, Scott Jurek finished second behind Arnulfo. A Tarahumaran beat the pro-ultra ace to the finish line. Scott wasn't used to losing, says McDougall, especially not to some no-name in a pickup race in the middle of nowhere. This had never happened to him before, but he knew what to do about it. Scott walked up to Arnulfo and bowed. Aw, that's nice. And throughout Born to Run, McDougall draws similarities between pro-runner Scott Jurek and the native running Tarahumara. It was scary watching Scott run side by side with Arnulfo, he says. Even though Scott had never seen the Tarahumara before, and Arnulfo had never seen the outside world, somehow these two men, separated by 2,000 years of culture, had developed the same running style. It's as if that running style is an innately human one. Their diets line up too. As a corporate-sponsored elite athlete, says McDougall, Scott had the worldwide buffet of nutrition at his fingertips, but after experimenting with the entire spectrum, everything from deer meat to Happy Meals to organic raw food bars, he'd ended up with a diet a lot like the Tarahumara. Apparently, an ultra-running pro and natives who live on running have a lot in common. One reason Caballo Blanco reached out to Jurek is because Jurek cited a Tarahumara saying in an interview. When you run on the earth and run with the earth, you can run forever. So let's look more into Jurek. His 2012 autobiography, Eat and Run, describes his personal journey to becoming one of the greatest American ultra runners of his day, and perhaps the most famous vegan athlete ever. The book gets pretty sad, but then you get a plant-based recipe at the end of every chapter to help lighten the mood. One running inspiration comes from his mother, who Jurek cared for as a child in Minnesota as she struggled with multiple sclerosis. She died on March 22nd, says Jurek. Those last hours, I didn't stop stroking her hair or telling her, "Don't worry, I'm here." I told her that I was a good cook because of her. I told her I ate fresh food and vegetables because of her. I told her I ran because of her. Here, you'd better cheer yourself up with some rice balls. On the Ultra Trail, Jurek frequently returns to his father's words. Whenever I complained that I didn't want to pick rocks or stack wood, says Jurek, my dad would growl, "Sometimes you just do things." After a while, I stopped complaining. In my second Minnesota Voyager, I made the pain mine. I used it. All through the 50 miles of the race, I listened to it. You could have done more. You can do more. Sometimes you just do things. Here, try a lentil mushroom burger. It becomes clear that a central reason Jurek runs is connection to his past and the people in his life, like his childhood friend Dusty, who paces him on ultramarathons. To put it Jurek's way, I craved the joy and the peace that had filled me when I ran the game trails with Dusty, the quiet, sublime warmth that had enveloped me when the snow settled on the lonely snowmobile trails of the Great North. But by the end of the book, the two have a falling out. Dusty didn't return my calls, so Jenny called him. He declined the invitation. "I'm tired of being Jerker's," he said. One of the things I appreciated about running was how it strengthened and deepened friendships. Could it have cost me my most important, closest friend? Here, have some holy moly guacamole. Beyond connection to people in his life, to a certain extent, running is Jurek's escape from himself. It had turned into a kind of meditation, he says, a place where I could let my mind, usually occupied with school, thoughts of the future, or concerns about my mom, float free. I'm convinced that a lot of people run ultramarathons for the same reason they take mood-altering drugs. Jurek mentions a few runners who run to escape drug addiction. I don't mean to minimize the gifts of friendship, achievement, and closeness to nature that I've received in my running career, but the longer and farther I run, the more I realized that what I was often chasing was a state of mind, a place where worries that seemed monumental melted away, where the beauty and timelessness of the universe of the present moment came into sharp focus. I had been reading more about Buddhism and self-actualization. I wanted the peace that these mystics talked about. I wanted the serenity I found in movement, the calm that spread through me the longer I ran and the more fatigued I got. Winning had thrilled me, but what thrilled me more was forgetting my worries, losing myself. Somehow, we always get back to Buddhism here at Thinkster. But that's not Jurek's only cultural inspiration. He also mentions the samurai code of Bushido, the original marathon runner Phidippides, and the Tarahumara. While the Tarahumara run to get from point to point, says Jurek, in the process they travel into a zone beyond geography and beyond even the five senses. Maybe it's presumptuous of me to describe what the Tarahumara probably don't articulate themselves, but when I was with them, I couldn't help but feel that they were experiencing a peace and serenity, that they, through running and through living with great simplicity, were able to access a state of being, a zone, a sixth sense, where they were in touch with the world in its purest form. It's the zone I had been seeking for so long. At the end of Eaton Run, Jurek runs a 24-hour race. You just run laps until you run out of time and compete to cover the most distance. The overarching question people ask, says Jurek, usually takes the form of one word. Why? Do you have something to prove? Are you running away from something? The answers were more complicated. I did want to win again. I did want to find that place of egolessness and mindlessness that only the monotony of a 24-hour race can produce. But mostly I wanted to run because of my mother. Here, have some apple cinnamon granola. Scott Jurek set the US record for miles in a day, by the way. I had run 165.7 miles, an American record. No other North American had run farther in 24 hours. I had done what I had set out to do. It was time to rest. then I would eat, and then run again. Scott Jurek isn't like the Bushmen or Tarahumara. If he stops running, he won't starve to death, or be eaten by a lion or conquistadore. And yet, he runs like them, inspired by them, for the sake of a mindset which connects him to his family, friends, the world, and himself. Scott Jurek had help from a co-writer, Steve Friedman. Could someone who writes novels for a living give us another view of running? Maybe you've read some books by Haruki Murakami, like 1Q84, Kafka on the Shore, or A Wild Sheep Chase. But the only book of his I've read is his 2007 memoir, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. So what does Murakami talk about when he talks about running? He compares it a lot to writing. Both running and writing are very personal activities. In both, we come up with our own objectives, and we have an opportunity for self-discovery. Says Murakami, most ordinary runners are motivated by an individual goal. Even if he doesn't break the time he'd hoped for, as long as he has the sense of satisfaction at having done his very best, and possibly having made some significant discovery about himself in the progress, then that in itself is an accomplishment. The same can be said about my profession. In the novelist's profession, as far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing as winning or losing. What's crucial is whether your writing attains the standards you've set for yourself. In this sense, writing novels and running full marathons are very much alike. Murakami might like to say that he ponders something important while he runs, but like Jurek, running seems to let Murakami empty his mind. I'm often asked what I think about as I run, he says. I don't have a clue. Occasionally, hardly ever really, I get an idea to use in a novel. But really, as I run, I don't think much of anything worth mentioning. I just run. I run in a void. Or maybe I should put it the other way, I run in order to acquire a void. Also, like Jurek, Murakami mentions that running cleaned up his health and diet. Jurek had a phase where he ate junk food for lunch every day until he adopted his plant-based diet. When Murakami took up running, he quit smoking 2 packs a day and says, I began to eat mostly vegetables with fish as my main source of protein. I cut back on rice and alcohol and began using all natural ingredients. Sweets weren't a problem since I never much cared for them. Personally, I can't relate to that one at all. I've always had a sweet tooth. But also like Jurek, Murakami mentions how running connected him to people. I remember 2 young runners in particular, Taniguchi and Kanei. Sadly, though, they were killed in a car accident. We'd hardly ever spoken, and I didn't know them personally that well. Still, as a fellow long-distance runner who'd encountered them day after day, I felt like we somehow understood each other. Even if the skill level varies, there are things that only runners understand and share. Geez, you've still got some of that apple cinnamon granola, haven't you? Unlike Jurek, however, Murakami doesn't think anyone and everyone can or should get into running. I've never recommended running to others, he says. If some people have an interest in long-distance running, just leave them be, and they'll start running on their own. If they're not interested in it, no amount of persuasion will make any difference. Marathon running is not a sport for everyone, just as being a novelist isn't a job for everyone. Ultramarathons clearly aren't for everyone, but in running one, Murakami finds that transcendent mindset, the void he and Jurek seem to desire. Have you ever run 62 miles in a single day, he asks. No normal person would ever do something so foolhardy, but I did once. You'd expect it to afford you a special sort of self-awareness. More or less, for better or for worse, this happened to me, and I was transformed. Eventually, the struggle of the ultramarathon causes Murakami to disassociate with himself completely. You have to force yourself into an inorganic place, he says. I'm not a human. I'm a piece of machinery. I don't need to feel a thing. Just forge on ahead. I repeat this like a mantra. I don't think about anything. I don't feel anything. Over miles and miles, this transformation brings Murakami beyond life and death itself. Usually, when I approach the end of a marathon, he says, all I want to do is get it over with and finish the race as soon as possible. But as I drew near the end of this ultramarathon, I wasn't really thinking about this. The end of the race is just a temporary marker without much significance. It's the same with our lives. Just because there's an end doesn't mean existence has meaning. I just vaguely experienced this idea, not with words, but as a physical sensation. My mind went into a blank state you might even call philosophical or religious. Murakami admits that losing his consciousness like this isn't a writing-friendly mindset. But, like Jurek, Murakami gets meaning from running. Meaning which often does line up with writing, another key aspect of his life. Maybe running isn't special this way. In the foreword, Murakami mentions Somerset Maugham once wrote that in each shave lies a philosophy. I couldn't agree more. No matter how mundane some action might appear, keep at it long enough and it becomes a contemplative, even meditative act. Still, given humanity's history of running, I figure it's a good enough place to look for oneself. If we want to find ourselves on a long run, maybe we should turn to Sakyong Mipham Rinpoche's 2012 book Running with the Mind of Meditation. Mipham is a Buddhist, a Tibetan Lama, and leader of the Shambhala, the kind of person who can meditate for tens of hours at a time and then go training for an ultramarathon through snowy mountain trails. Or he was, until a sexual misconduct scandal. You can't have anything nice, can you? Squidlings, even if this book sounds nice, don't let a drunken monk put his hand on your tentacles. Mipham begins the book by clarifying that running and meditation are not the same. People sometimes say, running is my meditation, says Mipham. Even though I know what they mean, in reality, running is running, and meditation is meditation. That's why they have different names. It would be just as inaccurate to say, meditation is my exercise. Still, Mipham does see a great overlap between running and meditation, and often swaps talking about the two as if there was no space separating them. Running can be a support for meditation, he says, and meditation can be a support for running. Running is a natural form of exercise. Likewise, meditation is a natural exercise of the mind. Exercising your mind helps you connect with that long-forgotten goodness we all have, and physical exercise helps you the same way. Mipham remarks that Prince Siddhartha himself was an athlete before his spiritual journey, so the Buddha was quite well suited to talk about both physical and mental disciplines, as ideally one would have both of these elements in one's life. One easy connection between running and meditation is the importance of breathing. I find, says Mipham, that teaching meditation to people who run is sometimes easier than teaching it to those who don't, because runners have a natural feeling for the breath. For runners, working with the breathing is straightforward. But besides the breath, just like Jurek and Murakami, Mipham finds running connects him with other people. He recounts this conversation on Tibetan trails with assistant and running partner Josh. Is there anything we should be looking out for, Rinpoche? I quickly replied, yeah, cobras, leopards, wild elephants, and, oh, the occasional pack of wild dogs. Josh laughed and asked, no, really, what should we be watching out for? Looking at my face, he said, oh, you're not joking. Not about that, I replied. At that moment, the nature of the run changed for him. Even though we weren't saying much, there existed between us the camaraderie of an unspoken language, a deep feeling of appreciation that we were alive and healthy. Beyond Jurek and Murakami, in the traditional Buddhist style, Mipham extends this connection with runners to compassion for all sentient beings over 4 phases: the tiger, the lion, the Garuda, and the dragon. As a tiger, you feel compassion for yourself. The tiger, says Mipham, is the principle of mindfulness, which leads to contentment. In the context of meditation, this means that we accept ourselves and appreciate others. In relation to running, being friendly to ourselves means being kind to our running mind. Being merciful means being merciful to our body. We become compassionate for ourselves by understanding ourselves. In both meditation and running, says Mifam, the tiger phase shows you things about yourself that you never noticed before. Respecting how you feel during your run allows you to appreciate who you are in the very life you are leading. As a lion, you appreciate your progress as a tiger. In running, says Mifam, the lion phase is when we head out the door without our watch, without timing ourselves. As we see in meditation, when we are no longer struggling with ourselves, we are more content, more at peace, and thus happy. Despite this peace and happiness, the lion isn't free of pain. Expecting to be free of pain is putting the ego on a pedestal set up for disappointment. The lion deals with pain cheerfully, says Mifam. That does not mean suppressing it. The lion knows that underneath the pain lies fundamental healthiness and basic goodness. Even when it hurts, you can promote that attitude by turning your mind to its natural radiance and generating compassion for others. A Garuda is a phoenix which has arms in addition to its wings, which starts flying right out of the egg. When meditators enter the Garuda phase, says Mifam, they are no longer trying to figure out how to meditate. They have mastered the technique. For runners, this outrageous phase of training means that we are competent and accomplished. Now we can challenge ourselves. When Mifam says outrageous, he doesn't mean dangerous or foolhardy. He means outside our comfort zone. The secret of the Garuda, he says, is that its outrageousness is completely dependent on our being grounded. We must not turn into Icarus, flying too close to the sun and melting our wings. Rather, spontaneity can serve to reawaken our purpose. This is how the Garuda moves beyond hope and fear. The dragon completes the journey of all those prior animals. In the dragon phase of our running, says Mifam, we are basing our activity on intelligence and compassion. We are no longer running for ourselves, but to benefit others. Extending ourselves, we join with others to run for a charity or a cause like world peace. I don't know if Mifam literally means like a charity fun run event. I'm sure he'd encourage doing a charity fun run, but he's referring to a charitable mindset. Our run, he says, becomes a process of actively training our intention to benefit others in the world. Our mind and heart are extending further, even globally. In one run, we are contemplating all beings and how we can help the universe. Through running and meditating, we become better citizens of the world. Mifam explains walking pilgrimages are long-established activities in Buddhism. In Tibet and other parts of the world, he says, taking long walks as a pilgrimage from one sacred spot to another is considered a path to great spiritual merit. I have gone on walking pilgrimages to various holy sites, walking all day long. Such walks provide excellent exercise, while also enriching the mind. Let's take this to a logical extreme. If you need more Buddhism in your run, maybe you could be the first foreigner to complete a 1,000-day Kaihogyo in Japan. John Stevens' 1988 book, The Marathon Monks of Mount Hiei, begins with a history lesson of how such a mountain of marathon monks came to be. Stephen says the marathon pilgrimages began with the birth of the Grand Patriarch So'o in 831, who is said to have said the mountain Hiei itself is a mandala. Practice self-reflection intently amid the undefiled stones, trees, streams, and vegetation, losing yourself in the great body of the Supreme Buddha. So'o's favorite form of the Buddha is a fierce one, Fudo Myowo, the unshakable king of light. Stevens says Fudo has a fearful face, terribly troubled by the world's inequities, its stupor, and its implacable hatred for the Dharma. Encompassed by a fiery nimbus, Fudo burns up evil passions while illuminating the darkest corners of the universe. Once, So'o saw Fudo Myo'o in a waterfall, so he jumped in and collided with a log, which he carved into Fudo Myo'o. Maybe it's because of these sorts of visions that Stephen says the visionary monk acquired a reputation as a master of esoteric science and was considered to be a wizard. So it was taken quite seriously when So-o had a dream which told him to perform pilgrimages to all the mountain's holy sites. The practice caught on under the name Kai-ho-gyo. So-o's successor, Hengo, says Stephen, further developed the areas Myo-do and Katsuragawa as centers of Kai-ho-gyo. Hengo is traditionally believed to have done Kai-ho-gyo for 3,600 days, representing 10 years of continuous pilgrimage. At first, Kai-ho-gyo was largely freestyle, says Stephen, depending on the predilections of the pilgrims. But by the 1500s, the manner of dress, the basic routes, and other procedures were codified. So what is the manner of dress for a gyoja, a spiritual athlete? A pure white outfit consists of a short kimono undershirt, nobokama pants, hand and leg covers, a long outer robe, and priest's surplice. Around the waist goes the cord of death with a sheathed knife tucked inside. These two accessories remind the gyoja of his duty to take his life either by hanging or self-disembowelment if he fails to complete any of the practice. That's not just for show. Stephen gives at least one example. Sakai was doing preliminary training in the mountains when he was attacked by a wild boar. Unable to continue, he pointed the knife at his throat so that if he fell, the blade would pierce the skin and he would remain faithful to his vow to kill himself if he failed to complete the course. Showing up at the temple gates an hour late, Sakai apologized for the delay, explaining sheepishly that he had overslept. Stephen says the number of monks who died or committed suicide en route is not known, but the path is lined with unmarked graves of gyoja who had been killed in action. This is the reason the gyoja is dressed in white, the color of death, rather than basic Buddhist black. The gyoja also get a coin to pay their way across the oriental equivalent of the river Styx, and a hat with a long, long brim. They're not actually allowed to wear the hat until they've marathoned for 300 days. Until then, they've got to carry the hat around with them. Marathon monks generally go through a pair of sandals a day. Says Stephen, most gyoja have their sandals made by a pious old grandma who lives in Sakamoto. Her sandals are treasured as being both comfortable and good luck. With a suicide knife at the ready, I'd want all the luck I could get. All of this is done with relatively little food. A plant-based diet Scott Jurek would probably find lacking, and very little sleep. Gyoja are known to take cat naps. But monks don't start with a 1,000-day Kai-ho-gyo. They start with a 100-day Kai-ho-gyo, which covers shorter than marathon distance. Depending on where they're starting, that might be 18 miles, stopping at 255 stations of worship, says Stephen, and negotiating thousands of stairs and several very steep slopes along the way. At Imoru Valley, the course is longer, 40 kilometers, 25 miles just under official marathon distance, with a few more stations of worship. The stations include stops at temples and shrines housing just about every Vedic, Buddhist, Taoist, and Shinto deity that exists in the pantheons of those creeds. At each station, the gyoja performs some hand motions, mudra, and recites a chant, a mantra. The whole course could be run in under 6 hours, but that would mean a gyoja didn't mantra and mudra long enough, so monks usually take around 7.5 hours. During the entire course, says Stephen, the monk sits down only once to chant a 2-minute prayer for the protection of the imperial family while facing the direction of Kyoto Palace. After 100 days of Kai-ho-gyo, which I don't think need to be done in a row, monks can petition the Hiei headquarters to be allowed to undertake the 1,000-day challenge. After 300 days of running spread across 4 years, the monks are finally allowed to wear their hats, and even some socks. Then the monks run daily for 200 days, at which point they're allowed to use a walking stick. After 700 days of running, the gyoja has a new kind of challenge. Doiri, a 9-day fast. Not like running fast, like a not eating fast. No drinking either, or even sleep. All they do is chant the Lotus Sutra, the Heart Sutra, and a shorter Fudo Myowo mantra, repeated 100,000 times. It's clear that the monk might not survive, so they send out a letter inviting everyone to a farewell dinner. The experience is designed to bring the gyoja face to face with death, says Stephen. Hiei legend has it that the original period of Doiri was 10 days. When almost all the monks died, it was shortened just a bit. By day 5, says Stephen, the gyoja is so dehydrated that the saliva in his mouth is dried up and he begins to taste blood. To prevent the sides of his mouth from adhering permanently, the gyoja is allowed, from the 5th day, to rinse his mouth with water, but every drop must be spat back into the cup. Every day, the fasting monk fetches water, but the water isn't for them. They give the water to the image of Fudo Myowo, which Grand Patriarch Sowo carved from a log. Maybe Fudo Myowo misses its waterfall. Then, in the 6th year, back to running. The pilgrimage is longer now, 60 kilometers, almost 40 miles a day. For the final 7th year, there are 200 days of an even longer pilgrimage, 2 marathons a day, during the aptly named Great Marathon, O Mawari, says Stephen. The monk sets out from Hiei at 12:30 a.m., covers the 84 kilometers of 52 miles over the next 16 to 18 hours, and then arrives sometime between 4 and 6 in the afternoon at a temple in the center of Kyoto to rest for a few hours. The following day, beginning at 1 a.m., the monk reverses the course. That sounds really hard, but to help them out, the monk gets a pusher. A junior monk, hoping to do these marathons someday, follows close behind, bumping the monk forward with a wooden pole. If the junior monk isn't very good at this, it might actually make running harder. The monk gets another attendant with a little chair to rest on at traffic lights. When all the running is done, the final task of a marathon monk is yet another fast. This one's only 8 days, but it takes place in front of a roaring fire. The great 100,000 prayer fire ceremony takes place 2 or 3 years after completion of the 1,000-day marathon, says Stephen. It's not obligatory, but most of the modern marathon monks undergo it. Although this fast is 1 day shorter than that of the Doiri, and a few hours of sitting-up sleep is permitted, most gyoja feel that this is the harder trial. It is, in the early stages, like being roasted alive in hell. The gyoja eventually becomes one with the fiery presence of Fudo Myowo, consuming all evil and purifying the world. If I'm reading this correctly, fewer than 100 monks have completed the 1,000-day Kaihogyo. Some of those monks did the 1,000-day Kaihogyo twice. Stephen mentions one who did it 3 times. But the first Kaihogyo is the hardest, because after one, a gyoja's got some clout. While the first 1,000-day term must be carried out in the established manner, says Stephen, quite a bit of leeway is allowed for those who are Daigyoman Ajari. After all, they are living Buddhas. Thankfully, it seems like monks only try the Kaihogyo if they have a handle on death itself. After completing an initial 1,000-day term at age 43, says Stephen, Kanjun continued on to a second term, finishing in 1910. Then, on the 2,500th day of pilgrimage, he came to his favorite place on the Gyoja path, neatly arranged his articles and his robes, sat down, and serenely passed away beneath a stone Buddha he especially liked. Why do the monks do all this? What makes the marathon monks run? Buddhism can never be understood purely through the intellect, says Stephen. It must be experienced. Learn through the eyes, practice with the feet. At the end, the marathon monk has become one with the mountain, flying along a path that is free of obstruction. Awakened to the supreme, one marathon monk described his attitude thus: "Gratitude, not asceticism, is the principle of the 1,000-day Kaihogyo." Stephen closes the book saying the marathon monks are splendid athletes to be sure, and the severity of their training defies belief. But to me, the most admirable thing about the Hiei Yoja is their warmth, open-heartedness, and humanity, qualities far more important than the ability to run 1,000 marathons in a 7-year period. Facing death over and over, the marathon monks become alive to each moment, full of gratitude, joy, and grace. I've run a few marathons myself, but Kaihogyo seems at least a little too extreme for me. If I want to meet Fudo Myo, maybe I'll just try jumping in a waterfall instead. But even if I have trouble understanding these marathon monks, I see them as a natural extension of the other books I've described. McDougall argues humanity's evolutionary past may have been running-based. This gives us all something in common, something which Jurek and Murakami see as connecting them to other people in their lives. Jurek and Murakami both describe a peculiar mindset, an awareness, a mindfulness, that Mifam Rinpoche relates to meditation. The marathon monks of Mount Hiei are tapping into an ancient source of whatever unconditional compassion Buddhists are always on about. I haven't read books about Usain Bolt, maybe short-distance runners have a totally different take, but somehow long-distance runners get liberating meaning from the marathon. I used to run 3 days a week, 10 miles Tuesday, 10 miles Thursday, and then 20 miles Saturday. I'd do the long run up a windy mountain road. If you can run a few miles uphill, there's not a lot you can't handle. There would always be cyclists on that road too. They'd pedal hard to bike uphill, then coast easy on the way down. It looked like a lot of fun. One time, a cyclist asked me, "I see you running here every week. What are you training for?" I couldn't come up with an answer. I wasn't training for anything in particular. It just felt nice to have a physical schedule. It felt nice to see the rest of my life from so far away, from thousands of feet above. It felt nice to just listen to podcasts for a few hours. And then, after burning a few thousand calories, I'd buy myself a burrito, bigger than my head. Maybe looking for some deep evolutionary Buddhist reason to enjoy running is just thinking too much about something which should be self-evident. That's all I seem to do here at Thinkster. My next video will be about my first experiments with robotics and long short-term memory neural networks. That cognitive neurorobotics internship I applied to in Okinawa was cancelled due to COVID, but I'm applying again. Maybe travel will open up. I'd like to have another video to point to say, yeah, I can walk the walk. Thinkster, my video diary, is really all over the place. One video will be about running, one will be about robots, and one will be about Jackie Chan versus Carl Jung. If you're into it, subscribe. And if you've liked this video in particular, you might like a story I wrote on ted-writes.com called Man vs. Horse. It's about an ultramarathon runner who bets his legs that he can beat a cartoonishly evil multi-billionaire on horseback in a 100-mile run. It's sort of, Scott Jurek meets Stephen King's Misery, or Kaiji the Ultimate Survivor. Thanks for listening to me ramble so long. Bye-bye!